Hello and thank you for watching. This is John, and in this video I'm going to talk about Deep Space Nine, the Star Trek first Star Trek offshoot show that didn't involve the Enterprise. When it came out, I wasn't that much of a fan, to be honest. I was in full Next Generation swing at the time, because that show had really found its groove and picked up as in a later couple of seasons, so it was really pretty darn good at that point in time. My mom and my uncle made sure I grew up on the original Star Trek show, and I just been watching Star Trek all my life. I was a teenager at the time, and I was excited. I remember being excited, like, oh man, this is gonna be cool. Space station's a little bit different, still Star Trek. The people who were, making Next Gen, which I liked, were involved with that, and cool. I didn't like it when it first came out. I remember always liking Cisco. I didn't really remember why when I rewatched it this time, but I remember I did like him. I remember I liked some parts. I liked it when Worf came in and the Dominion War stuff was cool. But overall, I just remember like, man, I just didn't get into it. I didn't like it. Really wasn't that good. So this summer, I just sort of like, you know what? I keep getting it recommended. Last summer, I watched through again Next Generation, so I'm gonna give Deep Space Nine another shot. Um, so to begin with, I forgot how good the theme was. Like the opening stuff around the station, that's fairly standard with things, but man, I was listening to the theme, I'm like, oh crap, like this is actually a really good theme. So that was positive. I immediately remembered why I liked Avery Brooks as Cisco. Dude is amazing. Like his whole range with it, like he tries to keep like that nice, just chill, really cool, soft-spoken bass line where he's really just, well, that's not what I'm going to do. And even if it's just sort of like a lot of times he keeps that nice, even, calm, but he can regulate it where it's amused, where it's just sort of bass line, where it's a little bit more menacing, even on that just sort of smooth bass line. But he can get really silly with it. He when he got, sort of, it was that was scary. It was like, damn, that's really intimidating. Um, but his whole range, when he was like really into something, that was awesome to see. A baseball. I love the fact that he could like cook, and his dad was this sassy restaurant owner. I really dug that with his characterization. His struggle with being the emissary went really well, and it was just sort of like, okay, yeah, aliens, I'll do that. Oh, okay. But when he accepted it, man, he accepted it. And there wasn't really a whole lot of other wishy-washy stuff later on with it. I mean, there were some things later on where it was, the wormhole aliens or the prophets were telling him, this is going to get messed up if you do that. And be like, you know what, I'm doing it anyway. I'm like, that's pretty badass. I respect that. He's still taking that stance seriously, but he's still going to be him too. So I accept that. That's cool. Uh, so yeah, I just really liked him. He was really good. I mean, there wasn't anything that he ever did I thought that was annoying. There's that whole thing I read online where it was, in terms of Q being on there. The first time Picard met Q, he quoted him Shakespeare, and then always had to deal with Q later on. First time Cisco met him, punched him in the face. Well, first of all, to be fair, Q did set that up. But then he never saw him again. Well, it was like, don't think, I think that was more a writer decision than it was any sort of thing like that. Because I think Q would have liked to keep jabbing that to be like, oh, I got a reaction out of this. Let me keep seeing what other kind of reaction I can get. When he got that, what sort of thing, like that was funny with that. Um, so there's some specific stuff with like different episodes and things I'll talk about a little bit later. I'm just sort of skimming just some of my assessments, some of the characters and some of the things now. So Cisco was great. There wasn't anything that annoyed him, and I liked the fact that his love interest, because if we gotta have a love interest with everybody ever, wasn't one of the main crew. It was someone outside the main kind of cast crew sphere. So I like that. So it didn't have to be, well, one of these seven people. Who are these seven people going to hook up with? Oh, with him, it wasn't that, and I really like that that was a decision that was made. That being said, Cassidy Yates, she was okay. I mean, I kind of liked her. She kind of fit. She gave him some crap back. She wasn't going to take some of his sort of thing with it. Okay. There's always going to be that I'm a male. I'm gonna and I'm in this position of authority. I'm going to protect you. And no, I don't want you to protect me. I can take care of myself. At some point in time, someone's going to write that, I'm protecting you because I care about you. It's nothing to do with the fact that I don't think you can take care of yourself. I don't think you can protect yourself. I'm doing this because it's what I'm going to do. This is part of how I show that I care about you. I just saw blurbs. Batman with Catwoman's done that, and I think there's been one or two other shows that have done that. But there's always this drama where, like, I'm going to protect you. And I'm going to protect you in a way that really invalidates you. But it's like, oh, you know what? Well, you showing that you care about me is I'm going to invalidate what you're trying to. It's just tired of that. So they had a little bit of that, but overall, I thought it was a pretty decent relationship. Um, Jake Sisko, on the other hand, I've had to watch paint dry, and I'd rather do that than have Jake heavy episodes. Those first few seasons where it was him and Nog being all adolescent buddies, I hated those episodes. There was a lot of skip, 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 skip. Okay, this scene I'll watch. Nope, I'm not gonna watch that scene. It was boring. Skip, 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 skip. I did the same thing with the Ferengi episodes. The Ferengi episodes, hated them. Hated them. I'm gonna go right into Quark because Jake isn't even worth talking about really. The dude didn't act him badly, but I just was bored. But as an addendum to that, I will say the relationships that they showed, the way all the Cisco men sort of interact with each other, I thought was great. You got Ben, who was really hands-on with Jake and actually was like kissing him on like the cheek and on the head and all that, like just like really affectionate, outwardly like touching him and that whole thing, and then kind of respecting his decisions later on, be like, well, okay, well, this is what he wants to do. I'm not going to get all grumpy that he's not going into Starfleet. I mean, it's sort of like a surprise at first, but then he was supportive, gave him like positive, critical kind of feedback in some of his writing and stuff like that. The whole relationship with the dad was cool. Like they all had like a really cool, positive male interactions that wasn't just like really polluted, like oh yeah 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 affection. No, no, it was like really balanced and positive and cool. So I really liked that whole interaction. As I had mentioned, I did skip after the first few, pretty much through all the heavy Ferengi episodes, especially in the last couple seasons. I mean, they didn't have like the B story. In a lot of these shows, you got the A story through the episode, and then the B story picks up some of the time and some of the pacing with it. A couple of those didn't have a B story, and I know because I did my little Netflix skip 10 10 10 10, and a little thing comes up, and you can scroll through to what it looks like. And when I scrolled through the whole thing, I just backed out, hit next episode. I'm not watching it. They're terrible. The Ferengi are terrible. I don't. No one should be defending Quark. Right, and I'm gonna make a sidebar here. I know a lot of this is going to be, even in my own sort of critical idea of you can't really judge these other beings or whatever by human standards. That's been my crux. If you watch any like Highlander or any of these movies with vampires, it was like this guy's supposed to be 800 years old and he's still acting like he's a 20-year-old D-bag. No, no. If they're going to be 800 years old, they're going to be way different. You know, that's one of the cool things. What if we watch like was it the Francis Ford Coppola, Bram Stoker's Dracula? Like I can buy Gary Oldman being really old. like really old and powerful. Like he projected that. I can buy that. So I understand to an extent that I'm judging this in terms of human standards, and it's going to come up again with the Cardassians as well. But Quark isn't, he's not a good character. Like he was done well, and some of his interactions with people were amusing or something like that. But let's be honest, he was putting it in contracts and basically manipulating, trying to have sex with the Dabo girls. Like he was basically a sexual harassment, like date rapist practically. Like let's not say that, oh well he's just Ferengi, like no, this is not acceptable. Yeah, okay, it might be my human standards of not being acceptable, but when he's just like trying to put he had like these girls have to have sex with him in his contract, and he's saying, well, it's like, well, if you don't have sex with me, then you're fired, sort of thing. Like that was flat out in there. So let's not pretend that this was in any way like a real positive person with that. You know, Um, and I swear, if I have to hear another Ferengi yell, like they're screaming like some sort of dying fox, rabbit getting murdered by an owl, sort of scream, like I just no, just and it's just shut up. Rom had some redeemable things, and he had that kind of sweet idiot sort of thing, but he was still useful. Um, but he was overused because that wears thin. And Nog's arc was actually pretty good because after he got away from Jake, I mean, they did a good job, at least humanly, with a sort of adolescent progression where he was sort of like a jerk teenager, and then he kind of got into his head to do something bigger with the Starfleet, and then especially after being at Starfleet Academy for a while, he was like insufferable in terms about, well, this is the way it has to be. It's black and white like this, and like yelling at Jake about cleaning a room, and he's got to have this and that. So, um, but then after he was able to kind of arc out of that and kind of mature, where he was able to be more of a flushed, rounded character. Um, and even after he got like his leg blown off, like okay, yeah, you can appreciate that there's some PTSD going on there, and they dealt with that, and it's not kind of an interesting way, but part of that is because they had Vic Fontaine in with them, and I'll get to that later, but yeah, um, but they kind of redeemed him in my eyes, and Rom was just sort of when he kind of got his, like that was kind of cool. But yeah, Quark, no, I'm not going to sit here and defend Quark. Yeah, there was some stuff he did that was cool. There was some stuff he did that was funny or interesting in terms of the relationships with the other characters. But no, I can't like redeem him, I guess, in my mind. Another one I had a problem with was Odo, and I will admit that part of my problem with him might have been I expected the sort of robot character, the Spock or the Data, or the one, I'm sorry, the one they were kind of portraying as the robot, because Spock got just totally invalidated about the way he was until the crap hit the fan, and then he was like, "Oh my God, we need Spock to be Spock," and okay, but then we're gonna make fun of him later on. Data was much more accepted, and his kind of thing was cool. So maybe I was expecting that out of Odo, the the robot learning how to be a person sort of thing. I just never got why he was Captain Grumpy Pants the whole time. He came up just real gruff and I never got it. I never understood why. Like, okay, I think it goes back to what I was talking about, the sort of non-human characteristics. I didn't I didn't understand. This might again, this might be just my fault, for lack of a better word. I didn't understand why someone who he was a shapeshifter, okay, I can accept that he would feel traumatized by the guy who was like testing on him and stuff like that. Um, and I can accept the his mind is sort of wants to be ordered, so he will help with the sort of constabulary and the law and order sort of aspect of it. I can understand that. Okay, he's this other sort of thing. But it's interesting that someone who can change any shape and later on it can basically apparently be mist or pure energy um, would really be obsessed with strict order of things. That somehow doesn't make sense. I know he wasn't raised with his changing people, but somehow that still I never really got his characterization. I never he never clicked with me. There wasn't anything that I was really like, yeah, okay, I get it. I understand it now, or I can accept. I didn't get it. I didn't really like him that much, and I felt that his whole thing with Kira later on was really forced. I didn't. A lot of the relationships in there, in terms of the romantic ones, I felt were trite and forced, and they're just trying too hard. Uh, I just I didn't get him. I didn't like that he hooked up with Kira. I didn't like that that had to happen. I didn't like him really that much. I didn't get it. Um, moving on though, Julian Bashir. Hated him at first, and I think you're supposed to be kind of annoyed with him, his really sort of immature sort of acting for it, but I just flat out wanted to slap the crap out of him. It was just you're just annoying as shit. But he grew on me a little bit, like once, after that first season when he calmed the hell down and wasn't super manic hormone boy the whole time. That helped. And then later on, we got some depth with some things. The relationship with O'Brien started off with being really annoying as well. Again, forced. Felt like, all right, well, these are going to be two. Here's this really smart, peppy sort of really naive guy who's, oh, I'm out frontier. Let's have adventures. And the guy who's older and settled in his ways and has a family and is really practiced in his craft and has been out there and had these adventures is like, you kind of got that odd couple thing. But I have to admit that relationship did kind of grow on me. Like, okay, I liked them being really good friends. Um, his arc it was kind of interesting seeing him settle in, seeing him be more mature. Um, the whole genetic enhancement thing, I think, was an interesting idea, but I didn't need to be told 3 times at least every episode that he was genetically enhanced. In the 90s, if you read like Wolverine in the 90s, you always had to hear him say, I'm the best there is at what I do, and what I do isn't nice or isn't pretty or something like that. Like every single issue for I don't even know how many always had that line in it. Always. Every single one. And it was just like, I get it. All right? You don't need to remind me every single episode. You didn't have every single episode. I don't remember observing that every single episode in Next Gen, someone was telling Data he was an android. He didn't need to tell Worf every single episode he was a Klingon. It's just sort of like, you, just stop. I get it. We know. Stop. And that got annoying. Um, but now having a romantic relationship with Ezri Dax at the end again felt forced. Like we weren't, we missed. Maybe we felt bad about what happened with Jadzia, so we'll throw him a bone with Ezri, which I felt was kind of crappy towards Ezri. Um, so that's Bashir. O'Brien, I felt that the show, especially in the first couple of seasons, was entirely too much about him. It really seemed that I'm just sort of like, I don't know who's supposed to be the lead in this show. You would think it'd be Cisco because he's the commander, but all these are about O'Brien. You know, his relationship with Keiko was always sort of weird to me. I mean, I'm in a she's way above my league sort of relationship, so like I can't say that that doesn't happen. But I mean, he is useful. He is pretty brilliant in the engineering part and everything like that. But that relationship was just sort of and all the stuff with the kids, like okay, I just sort of just felt like waiting for something else to happen. Um, I mean, I didn't dislike him in Next Gen. I didn't dislike him in Deep Space Nine. It didn't really like light me up either. I mean, it kind of felt from Next Gen that they were trying to say, no, he's not Scotty. He's Irish, not Scottish. So no, he's not Scotty at all. Um, so going on to Deep Space Nine with him, I understand it was a way to kind of maybe bridge a little bit of that next gen gap. And so maybe in the first few couple seasons we wanted to really show O'Brien because you guys like next gen and see we have these two and didn't let the actual sort of show take off on its own. I don't know. Like I didn't dislike him, but I thought he worked better in a lesser capacity, a B role as opposed to being on the A role. Um, they try to give him some interesting stuff in terms of, actually being a soldier and having to do those things, and the one where he got like captured and lived out like 10 years in jail, but in his brain in like 20 minutes or whatever it was, like his kind of PTSD thing for that episode was a little interesting, but then they never addressed it ever again. It was like this might have been an interesting way to go and see him kind of work back up or evolve differently. And it was just like, no, he's just back to just sort of normal right after that. So, yeah, that was a little hit or miss for me. Kira Nerys. I liked her. I don't know if I would have liked her if Nana Visitor hadn't been the actress portraying her, because she did an amazing job being sort of like grr, terrier snap bite her sort of thing, and then being like real like, oh my god, that's so nice, and like having like a really good time. There were just times where anyone else might have just been like, oh, okay, cool, but she had like this thing with it. It was like, oh, like that's actually really cool. So I thought she had a good depth, a good range, and really made someone who actually could have been a really dull, annoying character interesting. Um, having the different relationships with the other Bajorans. Okay, I can understand that was cool. It makes sense. Having her with Odo, I didn't agree with. I didn't like. I thought was really overly forced. Maybe part of it was this sort of whoever wrote it fanboyed it out, like, I got my crush sort of thing, because yeah, I just all of a sudden she's like really good friends, and then talks to Vic Fontaine, and all of a sudden realizes, oh, she's been madly in love with him like the whole time. Like, it's no, it just felt forced. But yeah, I thought she was really cool. She did a really good job with taking a character that could have been easily really one-dimensional and really making her genuine and interesting, and someone that you could feel empathy for, even when they're like, "Nah, I'm about to kill a mother," or like, "I'm like, oh no, I okay." With that. So going through, I'm trying to save something for last. I did like that Worf came on, because I always just sort of liked Worf. I liked that they had a lot of more Klingon stuff, and they tried to evolve him even with the Klingon thing, where he wasn't just always kind of being a savior kind of thing with it. Like he had his struggles with them too. How to walk that line and everything, and that was always kind of an interesting part of his character. And I think they did a pretty good job with that. Made him have some jokes, which was cool. They actually had the people around him have an influence on him, which I thought was good. I mean, he wasn't in it the whole time, and he was still pretty much Worf throughout. So if you liked him in Next Gen, you're gonna like him in Deep Space Nine. I liked, it made sense that he and Odo sort of clashed at first, but I did like that they were kind of bonded a little bit in terms of how they wanted things ordered. Worf didn't understand that you kind of got to be a little bit more looser and freer on a space station because there's more going in and out than on the starship where you have way more control over. But when they were talking about their philosophies and they got along with that, I was like, okay, well that was a neat interaction with that. Again, not explored at all. I do have to say, Jadzia Dax was effing fabulous. By far, one of the best characters in Star Trek. Like, just her breadth and depth of things. The fact that, yeah, she was really smart in science, but she could go and, like, drink and gamble with the boys and whoop a dude's ass. All the Klingon stuff and everything like that. Like, that was kind of cool that she had. She probably inherited from the Curzon lifetime before. And if this is not making any sense to people, the Trill, which is what she was, some of them undergo a training process, and there's these little worm being things that when that they have in them. Some of them, not all the Trill, some of them, and that has all the memories and experiences and the personality of it. And when the host dies or is about to die, they take that wormy thing out and put it into another one, and so it's a way for that knowledge and experience to not get lost, and it adds a sort of distinctiveness on top of that too. So these other layers, and then that person who gets the symbiont, I think is what they said, is still kind of themselves, but aspects of the other past lives for all intents and purposes. Intense, T, sorry, and purposes comes out. And so her previous one, Curzon, was a mentor to Sisko. And, buddy buddy carousing guy was really apparently sort of like, hey, ladies, and her kind of guy. But Jadzia was more of a, sciencey type. Um, maybe, but those two kind of melded really well. So she could sit there and gamble with the Ferengi and fight with the Klingons and not only like Worf and the holodeck, but actually go on missions and blow stuff up and be all like, yeah, awesome, punch you in the face. Um, but she could be like really sweet and really, her character is really well fleshed out. They had her show some of her vulnerabilities with the man. I shouldn't have gotten this anyway. Like Curzon didn't even want me to be in the program at all, and now I have the Dax symbiote. Like this is, she struggled with that. I like that there really wasn't any sort of shaming. It's a little bit with Worf, but he kind of had those conservative values. But there really wasn't a lot of shaming in terms of her kind of dating around. There was one where they were joking, but it was mostly because they were talking about the guy where he had like I guess a see-through skull, so you like see his brain, and it wasn't so much that it was like, oh, he's like an ass. Like, why would you go? It was like, dude, he's got a see-through brain. How could you, like, what? But she just sort of defended it like, no, he was like a really cool guy. Um, but just sort of teasing her with that, it really didn't seem like she was really shamed that much for kind of dating around a little bit, which I thought was good because, especially in Star Trek, we've got the history of Kirk, who doesn't really date around, just sort of spreads starseed wherever he goes. But yeah, she was effing fabulous. I don't have a problem with her and Worf hooking up because they kind of led into her sort of Klingon fascination before, and here's sort of like a very pure and honorable Klingon coming in there. That would make sense that she would be kind of attracted to that. And his sort of very austere, this is the way my strict honor will be, would appeal to her because she's sort of like, oh yeah, I got you. Like messing with them, that sort of little trickstery kind of thing. I like that. I did think that that worked pretty well. Uh, so I didn't really have too much of a problem with that. But yeah, Dax was, Jadzia Dax was effing fabulous. You know, and she was able to not only kind of continue Curzon's friendship with Sisko, but have it in her own as well. So I thought that that was a good evolution of the thing. Like they didn't have to be romantically hooked up, good, because that has been weird, you know. And they had it where it was. And now when you start bringing Ezri Dax, because I guess the woman who played Jadzia wanted to do some other show during the conflict of interest, so they sort of killed her off, but had someone else come in, again passing it on to the next person. And it could be just because I've been watching Doctor Who since I was like one, that I didn't have a problem with someone new being this character, which is the same character with a different, maybe a little different perspective, a little uniqueness to that on their own, but still essentially kind of the same person as Doctor Who. You know, the Doctor, when he regenerates, there's a core of who he, now she, is. And that kind of stays the same. And everyone kind of has a little bit of a different take on it. So you get a different kind of perspective on that, but essentially still kind of the same. So I didn't have a problem with that so much. And I did remember that there was a changeover from back in the day, so that didn't surprise me. I was waiting for it to happen, so it might have been a little ruined for me anyway. Um, but they did kind of build that into a possibility for a character. If this is something that this thing does, then that might be something you might have to deal with. I really think Ezri gets a bad rap. I liked her. I like the fact that she wasn't, because she wasn't trained for this, she was confused and having problems with it. So, but then they didn't really have it where it was just all of a sudden she turned on a dime and was completely fine with it. You know, she still struggled with some things and being kind of confused about stuff. Um, Still being young, but still working on being competent at her job. And I thought in one season she did a pretty good job evolving. Like they actually made her kind of interesting, except for going for Julian Bashir. I thought that was forced. But overall, I thought she was pretty interesting. I mean, she's not going to be nearly as fabulous as Jadzia, but I thought she was really cool. So that I felt was handled really well. That being said, overall as a show, I thought the idea of having a sort of steady, overarching point or overarching arc, I guess, for the show was interesting. Because, you know, you didn't really have that with Star Trek and Next Generation, and even with the movies. Except for, you know, you get at the end of Wrath of Khan, builds in the search for Spock. I mean, that was the most sort of thing. I mean, they had their evolution and the continuity to a certain extent, but it wasn't like, you know, well, this is what's going on through the show. So this is our baseline for the show, and we're going to build off of that. That being said, I think the show would have benefited from being less episodes. Uh, some of the sort of filler episodes and stuff like that, especially when you get later in the series when there's the full-on Dominion War, and even the last season was like, if I didn't know any better, I would think that this show is going to go on for 2, 3 more seasons because they're not doing anything to wrap this up. And then all of a sudden, like the last 8 to 10 episodes, they're throwing all this stuff in, and you know, really pushing through all the war stuff and all this crazy stuff's going on and all everything. There's a lot of development, and then like the war thing kind of goes, and then the whole thing, like the sort of prophet spiritual alien thing that happened with it was like 2 seconds at the end. It really wasn't paced very well, I didn't feel. I'm not sure how it was planned. Like, okay, well, we're going to kind of have this as the baseline thing that's going on, and then we're going to add these people. But they started talking about the Dominion early, so I feel that they were trying to have that whole conflict happen from very early on. I just felt the pacing was kind of off with it. Like, if it would have been like the 12, 13 episode seasons like Doctor Who, or you get into like Walking Dead's like 16, but that sort of lesser episodes but tighter story, I really felt it would have been better served. Because when you got that through line, when it was, all right, this is what we're going to do, this is who we are, this is our arc, this is how we're going to go, it was pretty damn good. I admit, like, yeah, I liked it. A lot of the filler episodes, though, were annoying. They really weren't that interesting, with some exceptions. I think it was episode 18 of season 1. It had like these aliens who were becoming like almost these thought forms of these people that the crew liked. Like the Cisco had the one guy who was this famous baseball player, and the whole thing was basically how important imagination is to the human existence. Like, it's this vital thing. I thought that was a great episode. It was pure Star Trek. Like, it was this sort of like simple concept of these sort of energy aliens who didn't understand. And the idea of this sort of higher quality of human existence being really important for that human existence and being really validated for it. It was just distilled pure Star Trek. And I was like, oh wow, like that was really good. The going back in time Tribble one, like some of it seemed kind of forced, but you could tell they had fun with it. Like, it was like, I want to have them in Tribbles. I want to address the fact that old Klingons and now Klingons look different, but they addressed it by just sort of saying, we don't talk about it. Like, oh, I like that. Someone obviously really loved that episode of the original and wanted to play with it, and I thought it was fun. I like that episode. The one baseball episode where they're playing the Klingon, not the Vulcan crew of this other ship, and that sort of rivalry, like, that was okay. Like the sort of thing at the end where they lost, but they were still like, yeah. Like, I was like, okay, I like that. That was fun. The episode with, the sort of Ocean's 11 casino heist one. Okay, I ended up thinking like, oh, I know where this is going. Oh God, but I liked it. Um, I thought it worked well, especially when Cisco stepped up. Like, he made his point, like, I'm not going into this time. Like, black people were not liked at this time. Like, this wasn't a good thing for black people to be in. Like, no, I'm not doing that. But then when he stepped in, like, he stepped in smooth. Like, he looked good in that tux walking down. Like, yeah, okay, cool. That was really good. So that was fun. And the one where Cisco is almost that sort of Chengzu, am I the butterfly dreaming I'm Chengzu, or am I Chengzu dreaming I'm a butterfly thing, where he was in like, yeah, like the 60s as a science fiction writer, and all the crew were these like writers or the cops or this other thing. And with that, so that sort of vision he had, um, That was pure Twilight Zone. Like that was a really good Twilight Zone episode. Like that didn't even have to be on Star Trek. I mean, that was I thought that was like a really good episode too. It had all the Twilight Zone-y kind of things to it. Um, really what's the kind of higher good, what's the purpose and all that. Like it had a lot of sort of good questions to it. So I thought that was a really good episode as well. So the general story of the Bajorans being occupied by the Cardassians, there were a couple episodes where they really pushed the this is an allegory for the Jewish Holocaust thing. I mean, there's a couple episodes where it was like really, really Jewish Holocaust. Um, and then taking over the space station, and will they or won't they be with Starfleet, and then finding the stable wormhole to that whole other quadrant of the galaxy, and then the aliens that lived inside that, the sort of energy beings that are sort of beyond space-time for all intents and purposes, having Cisco be their emissary, the one who's going to kind of speak for them, for those people. That whole kind of part of the story I thought was cool. I liked it. I liked that he was accepting of it later on. There was one character, the Vedics were sort of like the priests, and then the Kai was almost like the Pope. And then there's this one woman who, I mean, she was basically like a borderline personality disorder. She just wanted the power, and she was such a manipulative, horrible person about it the whole time. And man, every time she was on, I was like, just launch her out of an airlock. Your lives will be so much easier. Like honestly, no one will miss her. Come on. But she was such just a conniving, manipulative, just horrible, horrible person. Like she did a really good job. The woman who acted as Kai Wen did a really good job with just that narcissistic. But she's like a borderline. Like she was like a flat, but like a powerful borderline. Not like the sort of crazy, I'm gonna burn your house down sort of borderline, but like I'm going to do something and then the cops are going to take you away and I'm gonna be like, oh, I feel so bad for you, sort of borderline. Like it was like you are just horrible. So she did a good job with that sort of thing. And then the person who used to run the space station when the Cardassians had it, Gul Dukat, I liked him. I might want to take let me take that step back because he was a sociopath, like flat out. Again, we're talking human terms, and I'm sorry, we're going to talk human terms because the entire history of Star Trek is a history of humans going out to other races and teaching other races how to be better humans. I mean, the original show was all about that. All these other aliens, well, you need to act this way and you need to act that way because this is the right thing to do. And by right thing to do, we mean what humans would do, and especially what we think we are as Americans. And you have Data in Next Gen trying to be more human. All these aliens are acting like these different types of humans. I mean, they're almost like caricatures of different human traits. So, the Cardassians are kind of sociopaths. And Gul Dukat was a really good sociopath. Like he was a really interesting character. Like he full on believed his height. Like it was like, no, I'm doing everything I can. If it wasn't for me, the occupation would have been worse. I did all this stuff to make it better. But at the same point in time, he's doing all this stuff to make it horribly worse too. And he's basically forcing these women to like have sex with them or kill them and their families and all this stuff. So he's like this horrible, horrible person, but so believed that he wasn't. And that everything he was doing was really for the best and really this higher right. Like he was a really interesting character. And and he had his failures and all these other failures. and then he kind of was tapping into the sort of fallen angel prophets, the the beings who were from the wormhole. Those higher ordered beings had basically they had a whole mythology with basically fallen angels. Some of them rebelled and got kicked out. And their stories, Pa race. The Pa is almost sort of like a chi or ka or spirit sort of thing for the Bajorans. And then they had the Pa wraiths, who were, sort of the fallen angels for it. The demons. And they had the kind of idea. It was like, no, we were really for you guys, and that whole thing with it. And Gul Dukat hooked up with that whole thing and almost became like their sort of emissary with that. And I thought that was interesting. But it was the same thing though. Like they didn't completely change his character. He had a whole thing where he was almost the leader of this cult, and he was gonna have all the people in the cult kill themselves, and he would keep going. Like I'll kill myself too, but he wasn't going to because there's a special pill that wouldn't have killed him like it would have killed everyone. So it was like he was still in there. He was still him. So he like changed and evolved, but it was like, that's still you, which made a lot of sense. I like that. And then they had a whole thing where him and Kai Wen hooked up. He pretended to be Bajoran and led her kind of, corrupted her. Not really corrupted her because she was already corrupt, but sort of enabled her corruption to just say, screw it, I'm out. This is who I am. I'm evil. You guys. I'm going in with the power race too because I want power for me. I deserve it because I'm me. So their whole thing was cool. And then she was like, no, I don't want to be with you and all this other stuff. So at the very end, okay, yeah, there's spoilers, deal with it. At the very end, they had a whole thing where, okay, the Dominion War was here, and then their whole thing trying to free the Power Race. If they free the Power Race, this is going to wreak just destruction on Bajor. Millions and billions of people are going to die. Some people wouldn't, but it's just going to completely screw up the whole planet. So they had this kind of thing going on in like the last chunk of the 7th season. They had this kind of thing going on. And this is sort of like, are we going to close this off? And then like the Dominion War, and Cisco's all up in the Dominion War. Like, woo, here, like it really blew up. They're really going in, and the final push. And then they get to the cave, and then they are going to open this up, and all these things are going to fly out and destroy the world. So I'm like, what? And all of a sudden it was, we got like 15 minutes left in this 2-hour episode, and he hasn't dealt with them. Like here, they're in this thing and getting sung to him by this hologram everyone likes, and he's like, "Oh, I go down to the caves. Bye," and goes down, and all of a sudden is there, and then can't actually fight Gul Dukat because he's got possessed by one of these power rays, so he's like got powers and super strong, and burnt up Kai Wen, so she's obliterated. And then so Cisco tackles Gul Dukat, and they fall into the fire, and now he's sort of ascended into heaven with the prophets and is like an entity in with them because his mom was inhabited by one of these prophets, so he's sort of like this demigod, and so he's now with them. And he gave this vague thing that, oh well, I might come back, it might be a year from now, it might be yesterday, but I'll be back. And I'm like, no, you won't. You're dead. Your spirit's basically in heaven. No, you won't. Like, but that was at the end. Like the pacing of it was really jarring. It was really not well. They needed like at least another episode to really sort of settle everything. Those two big lines, because they did all this energy into one and kind of, oh shit, here, hurry up and throw it on that other one. So that was really harshly done. Like I don't disagree with where they went with it, because they kind of really messiahed Cisco up, and especially if he's kind of demigod, that kind of, I think are like Heracles or some of these other things. That's kind of what happens to those characters mythologically. So I didn't really have too much of a problem with that. I had a problem with the way they did it. the pacing overall of that. Side note, I mentioned Vic Fontaine a couple of times. The singer James Darren came in, and Julian, who's sort of obsessed with like the 1960s a little bit, like he had this whole like basically a James Bond setup, but a little bit like later James Bond, more like kind of Roger Moore, the silly um, villain sort of thing. And that there was a whole episode about that where they had to stay in and run this whole sort of 60s James Bond program out. And it was like, okay, I thought it was going to be kind of crappy, but it ended up being an okay episode. But he made another person who was like a 60s like crooner. So think like Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra kind of style guy. And he had like this lounge and he's singing all these old standards. And the first episode he came in, it was pretty cool. His name was Vic Fontaine. I was like, okay, cool. I like him. That was kind of cool. And it was something that could have been either a one-off, and that would have been a cool one-off, but they decided to bring him back. And he basically became a regular character. And he was more sort of self-aware than most other holograms would and or should be. I mean, he was pretty self-aware about a lot of things. Knew it was a hologram. It had parameters, like he couldn't really go beyond 1960s sort of style and everything like that, but he kind of knew what he was, and he could evolve and learn a little bit more. So I know that was kind of neat, but it really easily could have been a shtick and really poorly done and just sort of thrown in to have it thrown in, but he became a really interesting character. I mean, he was sort of, even though when Esri came in, she was, instead of a science officer, she was the counselor because they didn't have a counselor. So he was sort of like a little bit like a counselor too. Um, but he was interesting. He was kind of cutting through some of the crap and was just like, well, what? Um, so they had a couple, an episode where they were, helping him out now, and that was the casino robbing thing. And I thought that was neat. So I liked him. That was really well done. And there was Garrick, who was a Cardassian, who was a tailor, and they had all this stuff where they hinted, oh, well, he's not just a tailor. He had this other life and this other thing, and he was like this spy. He was like this black ops operative. What is he? Is he? Isn't? He's like, yeah, and like all that kind of came true, and he was, and a lot of his stuff was interesting. Like he was sort of his perspective on things was interesting, especially, and they forced a friendship between him and Julian because he was again, it was that sort of immature, really interested in this romantic idea of some of this adventurous life, but Garrick was the sort of real of that romantic adventurous life. So he would probably play with them a little bit, but when everything came in and he had to go, it was like, this is really what it's like. This, when you're in your little fantasy world, it's not like this at all. This is what it's like. If you can't deal with this, then get out of it. So he was kind of interesting. Um, yeah, I mean, I liked him. I didn't think he was as like there were people who, when I was like, hey, I'm about to go through DS9, there were people I know who are like, yeah, DS9's awesome. Like Garrick's great. I'm like, yeah, I liked him. I think he was great. I liked him. There was another character named Xiao, who was half Bajoran, half Cardassian, daughter of Gul Dukat, bastard daughter of Gul Dukat. And there was a whole thing of, well, he can't really um, claim her, and when he does, then she gets ostracized, or he might have to kill her, and all this. She was played by like 3 or 4 different actresses, the poor character, but they all did a really good job. And again, spoiler, when she gets killed, and that's kind of the turning point for Gul Dukat, 'cause he goes a little crazy for a while, and then he goes off, and then he comes back with the whole Pare thing. Um, but she was a really good character, and I felt if her relationship with Garrick would have been more sort of like uncle, brother, or another sort of father thing or anything like that, that would have been okay. But it was like romantic, and he's like way older than she is. It was weird. But she was like one of those. She was a was it the internet calls them cinnamon buns? Like she was kind of, she was like super sweet. She was really intelligent. She was this artist, but she had kind of like a good strength to her too, where she wasn't just a wilting pushover or anything. Like she was a kind of stoic and sweet and a really good character. I mean, like yeah, you knew after she became pseudo regular, it was like, oh crap, she's gonna die, isn't she? You just knew, and she did, and it was really sad, um, which was unfortunate. I do have to say, like, I liked the Defiant as a ship because I mean, okay, yeah, we have this space station, and so there's not a lot of movement. Okay, we had all these runabouts, and we go off and go different things. Maybe they could have done a little bit more with actually being on a space station instead of having to run around and do all this other stuff. I know that's part of the attraction of Star Trek, but you're trying to do something different. So when the Dominion War starts kicking in, this whole sort of Roman Empire in the Gamma Quadrant that comes in and gets annoyed with the Alpha Quadrant people for coming in. So we're just going to go and conquest your whole thing too. And they were led by Odo's people, the Changelings. So there is a conflict between he never knew them, but now that he knows them, they're these, the evil overlords of this whole thing that's trying to kill these people and dominate. And their whole structure was they had the founders of Changelings, and then the Vorta, these like kind of weird bad ears, and they were sort of these soft-spoken, order-following, again, kind of weird sociopath kind of people. And then Jem'Hadar, which are almost sort of like these reptilian dinosaur clone soldiers that are addicted to this Ketracel White, which is this sort of drug enzyme that they have to have because they've been genetically engineered to have that or they die. So real quick version with that. So when that kicks in, and Sisko had been head of these shipbuilding places, so that was kind of an interesting characteristic. So yeah, he's doing all his combat stuff and tactics, and he was a really good tactician with the war. But he had this idea, so he had been instrumental in this new kind of class of starship being made, and then they kind of got the prototype for it, which was heavily armored, heavily engined, heavily armed, kind of badass little ship. And I thought it was neat. I liked the Defiant. Defiant was cool. No, no, you are not on a space station during war, and then the space station was, the Gamma Quadrant, the whole, they're coming in through the Gamma Quadrant. The Cardassians and Bajor space station's right here. It is like the front line, pivotal sort of place for the Alpha Quadrant and Starfleet. You are not going to have the entirety of your senior staff running around doing shit on this ship. No. No, you're not going to do that. Your chief engineer, who you can't have go on a vacation for a couple weeks without major systems not working right, and your sort of head of medical, your head doctor on the space station, and your space station's chief constable, unless it's a special thing where they're definitely going to talk to the changelings or anything, those people would not be on there. You would not have your commanding officer and your executive officer of this space station on this ship flying around doing stuff. Like the entirety of the senior staff and the dude's kid on the Defiant going around doing all this stuff. No, that would not happen. Who's running the space station? This important thing if all your senior staff are on this ship. Who? The date rapist Ferengi? Like, no, you are not having all of your senior staff on there all the time. If Sisko is the commanding officer who has shown to being a very good tactician and commander of a starship or something like that is going to be on there, okay, maybe one or two other of the senior staff. Maybe Jadzia as the science officer, and she was a really good pilot. When Ezri was on there, she was basically communications officer. But what the hell is Bashir doing on there? You have an extended thing, okay, maybe you need the one doctor who's more capable, so the other doctors, okay, maybe on an extended mission, maybe I can see that, but on an extended mission, your whole senior staff shouldn't be on there. I mean, there were times one or two of the senior staff were still at the station, but most of them were on the ship. Like, no, no. And there were other things where they had it where, they had 3 or 4 of the runabouts and the other ships and stuff going on. All the senior staff are on these things. No, there was no reason for all the senior staff to be on these things other than the fact that it's the way we wrote the show, and here's an adventure, and we want everyone to be on the adventure. I thought they did a really good job in, well, an okay job in Next Generation with Riker going, the captain is not going on these away missions. I am. I'm leading him. Captain stays on the ship. I'm protecting the captain. That's the way it is. And honestly, in real life, the XO ain't going on these situations either. Battlestar Galactica had it more realistic, where okay, maybe your captain of the fighters might be on these, or these other Marines or something like that. I mean, you'd have these crews and these things set up so that the top brass in that thing, that station or that ship, should not be doing these other things. So by having your entire senior staff of a space station flying around on these missions, no, that kept pulling me out. It just bugged me. It was very show-ish, and not. I couldn't get the immersion in it because it was so just trite, showy. Overall, I liked it. I liked it better than I had done when I had originally watched it during its original run. I think it benefited from being able to just mainline instead of having to wait week after week after week, and then sometimes having a Ferengi episode or those early Jake and Nog episodes, which you could just completely forget about. But I mean, if you like Star Trek, you like sci-fi, it is worth watching. Again, you don't have to watch every single episode. You can, or most of the episodes, I watched like the intro portion before the theme and the credits, and then I would skip. And if they had, oh, it's Ferengi, 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 oh, something other than Ferengi, and I watched that, and then skip, 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 skip. I did a lot of that. Um, but I mean, overall, I mean, there was a lot of good stuff to it. There's a lot of things that were sort of like, but if you like Star Trek and you haven't watched it, if you like Next Generation and you haven't watched it, you like sci-fi in general and you're looking for a show, yeah, I'd recommend it. So that's Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Not quite in a nutshell because I've been ranting for about an hour. Not my intention to do, but I did. And if you stayed with me this whole time and didn't Ferengi episode me out, then you are a wonderful person. The fact that you're watching this makes you a wonderful person. If you watch the whole thing, you're an even more wonderful person, and I appreciate you greatly. So do the usual: like, share, subscribe. I know sharing might actually be kind of a tall order, to be honest with you. I'm not going to be upset if people don't share this. Uh, yeah, because this is kind of long. So that's all I got, because I'm cutting myself off. So thank you for watching, listening, and liking and subscribing, and see you later.